All right, we're ready to go. All right. Good evening and welcome to Inside Government, a show produced by Q Community College for the spring 2017 semester here at the college. And it is shown on Time Warner Communications, Verizon Fios, the Auburn Regional Media Access, ARMA, as well as Win 89.1. For the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. Last month, the New York State Legislature returned to Albany after November's elections. In January, the governor foregoed his usual State of the State address, or at least as what we will call the State of the State in the past for him, and decided to go on the road talking to several cities about his State of the State. He also released his 2017-2018 budget. And in the studio today, we have Assemblyman Gary D. Finch, who was reelected in November, I think to a 9th term in the legislature, defeating Democrat Diane Dwyer in a rematch. Assemblyman Finch was one of the few members of the legislature to attend the governor's State of the State road shows, as I'll call them. We've asked him on to talk about not only Albany in general, but the governor's budget, and specifically school aid and the governor's proposal for free college tuition, because the Assemblyman comes with a different perspective that most don't, as he was the president of the Board of Trustees here at Q Community College. But we'll also talk about issues such as, for upstate, such as infrastructure funding for Auburn and Owasco, and ride sharing. Welcome back, and congratulations.
Nice to be here, Guy.
And congratulations on your re-election.
Thank you.
9th, am I correct on 9th term? I was trying to do the math.
It is a 9th term, even though it's a little bit less than that, simply because I came in on a
Special election, okay. So, the governor proposed his budget about 4 weeks ago. Let's talk about what you might like in the budget. Is there anything you like in the budget? Because I know it's some of the things you don't like, and we'll get to those.
Of course there are things I like in the budget. I think...
It's for mom, apple pie, and baseball?
All of that.
Okay.
All of that and probably a little bit more. Certainly, it's a big spending budget. No question about that, about $150+ billion, which incidentally, for your viewers, it's the 11th or 12th largest budget in the world. Not just
like compared to countries.
Compared to countries.
Okay.
We are that high, and highly leveraged, so to speak. So it's no small piece of change we're talking about. But there's an education piece in there that he's actually added money to it. And the problem with education is it's allocated in a way that sometimes doesn't quite get to where it's needed.
And this
in high needs areas like Auburn needs it, and we get left out a bit.
So we'll talk about that. That's foundation aid and some of the other pieces of that. Are there things in the budget in general that you're not really keen on?
Well, I think certainly his initiative to provide low-cost free tuition to New York Staters sounds on the surface of it something great, but it's got a lot of problems with it. As a matter of fact, I think most of us would agree that college education is quite expensive right now. Just wait till you get it for free and find out how expensive it's going to be. It's going to cost everybody in the state of New York a good piece of change, and those who are paying off college loans right now are going to resent it enormously, to be paying their loans off and having to pay for someone else's tuition too. Lots of problems with that, and that's in the budget. There's he has a consolidation plan he wants to force on to municipalities, and that's been going on in his mind since when he was Attorney General, actually, and that's tied to funding that they'll deprive municipalities and school districts, et cetera.
Can he constitutionally, I know there's been some questions in Syracuse, because this is, clearly there's a war, at least from the outside it looks like, between the city of Syracuse, at least their mayor, and whether it's the consensus group or Joni Mahoney, the county executive. Can he mandate these consolidations? Because it seems unclear, at least from the Association of Counties, that some of this stuff needs to be voted on and driven by voters, not top down.
Well, part of his plan is to have it put on the ballot and have a referendum on the consolidation plans. He wants to force that.
But mandated versus usually where it's
just comes
publicly
down. Exactly.
driven, like consensus is.
No, this will be, local governments will be forced to put this on the ballot and treat it, or they'll be denied funding.
And
or that's a threat anyway.
And is there a threat to funds in Cuyahoga County?
Yes. Yeah, the city of Auburn would be under this be forced to put the consolidation plan to the vote.
And is that mandated for this year?
You know, I think it has to be done by 2018.
Okay.
So it's the way government moves, you know, it probably is immediate.
Well, it only moves as fast as whoever's driving the bus wants it to go.
So I would think the local governments, municipalities would not want to do this. I've talked to the mayor of Auburn, Mike Quill, and it's being forced down their throat, and because they want to have this funding from the state of New York, and it's been cut consistently anyway, so they're going to have a problem with it. But I think at this point they're going to have to do it.
Only because I guess this is a general overarching budget issue.
Yes.
You get a budget, there's very little because the governor has a lot of power, whether it's Andrew Cuomo or George Pataki or Nelson Ross. New York puts much of its budget power in governors, correct?
It does.
And so what can you change as a legislature? Can you change individual line items for spending? Or do you have to really, and usually I know this all comes out to the last 5-6 days where they call it the big ugly, and sometimes you get to see what's going in there, sometimes often you don't get to. But there's not a lot the legislature can change, can they?
Guy, I would say you're probably right on that. There are things that you can do to add into it, and that's been done. But to change or delete things from that budget is very difficult. As you know, the governor makes an appropriation, or at least he makes the presentation, and then the Senate makes its own version of the budget up. It's kind of informal, but it's there, and the Assembly does as well.
And these are one-house bills.
One
where
house
you've set your
bills.
priorities.
Right.
And when I say you, that's the Assembly as a whole.
As a whole.
Not necessarily the minority Republican.
Correct.
In the Assembly, or really minority Democrats.
Exactly.
Depending on which
In
way you do the
Senate.
math.
Right.
In the Senate.
Right, I know, it kind of moves about over there in the Senate. So, but the final budget is an amalgamation of all three, but basically it ends up more leaning in the direction of the Senate for some reason.
Okay.
The governor's budget tends to be, I hate to use this term, leaner, but it tends to be a little bit leaner than the final version coming out, but he anticipates that when he puts it together. I believe that's the case.
And that may come into play with school funding.
School funding, for sure.
So before getting into school funding, a couple other just general basic overarching issues. Is his budget balanced?
Well, he has to have a balanced budget.
But there is a
by
gap
statute.
there. But isn't there a gap, or is there only a gap in between revenues and expenses if you don't continue the millionaire's tax, which is the big revenue piece?
Right, right. I would say the budget is balanced. He presents a balanced budget, but no one knows exactly how that works itself out. There have been allocations from previous budget years, two that I know of, can speak of, that the money hasn't flowed even though the allocation is there and recipients are depending on it, municipalities. There are a couple of parks projects that I know of there. In the scheme of things, they are both in excess of $100,000.
So that
money has not flowed. Now that money has been allocated, but it hasn't come to the recipients. And I'm wondering, the question is why? When we're so flush right now with money, or supposedly we are, but the money from 2 years' budgets back have not come. That's a concern. I know we got a little bit off the beaten path, but the budget that he presents is balanced. It's anticipated revenue, which is good luck. That's
now,
happened
anticipated
before.
revenue is also on the decline.
Right.
And why is that? Is that specific areas? Is it sale? Is it income tax? Is it?
I think some of it's income tax. We're losing population all the time.
Okay.
We have that problem to deal with. We also have revenue where it comes in other ways. That's we just had a little windfall with that the bank issue that came up with like $3 billion. That money should really be put aside and used for some sort of permanent structure.
He tends to shove it right out the door, though.
Right, use it in the general fund.
So is the decline in revenue a long-term issue for?
I think it is for New York State, sure.
So let's talk about school funding, because that's what hits most people between now and when they have to vote on their school budgets in May. Aid is up. Dollar amounts
is up about $1 billion.
And I know there was a letter to the editor about you the other day from one of his
Right.
staffers, it says there is aid is up. But the question is, you still have districts like Auburn, and Jeff Perazzola said in that seat
Yep.
on Thursday, he's got a $4 million with an M gap.
Exactly.
And that, so while
Like 25 positions.
25, okay. Is this because of the so-called foundation aid?
Foundation aid is the key to the whole thing. That's
Okay.
what flows. And that's the most important part of the budget. But to understand what the school budget is about on the state level, very complicated. It took me, quite honestly, 4 years to be able to grasp it. It changes. There are reimbursement portions of it where school districts are reimbursed, but they're not reimbursed dollar for dollar. You may be reimbursed 75% of 100 that you don't get the 25%. It's on transportation aid. It all varies, and it all depends on how creative someone like Jeff Piazzolla can do.
Okay.
Because I know some districts they can lump things together, but the bottom line is smaller districts, high needs areas like Auburn, they get deprived of the foundation aid and what they need.
And traditionally, they have, the governor, you said he kind of is leaner. I think that was your word,
A leaner
budget.
version, if you can call it that.
And then usually the legislature tends to add money on.
Do some ads.
Do you expect that to be the case?
Yes, I do.
But do you think that would eliminate a $4 million gap for
No.
Auburn?
No,
Not
it
even
won't.
close.
No.
So again, we don't need to get into the square roots and other
Right.
issues of foundation aid, but foundation aid to really change, because nobody's ever going to give up money.
No.
Yeah.
No, they won't.
It would take two things. One is a great deal of political will, and the other one, and I've heard $2 billion, I think, has been the number. One of the numbers been tossed out there to add overall to fix this.
And that would only be a
One time.
one-time, and then you'd still have a problem in 2 or 3
Well,
years.
you'd have to keep $2 billion on for
It would go
forever.
on, just like as we were talking about the tax on utilities. It just doesn't go away, even though they're temporary.
So is it even doable to fix foundation aid?
I think they have to do something about it. I was at a meeting, actually one with Jeff, with school administrators about a month ago, and the formula that was presented there, and it's all in the formula and how it works, it seemed to be kinder to the smaller districts and less generous to districts that are in Westchester County, that have a huge tax base with a lot of wealthy families down there, live in wealthy districts, and they support those schools very generously. Where you can go down there and they're teaching violin lessons and Mandarin Chinese and all those things that we'd like to have our own children learn. And but they're so flush with money, then the state aid follows it. Those are the inequities.
Which usually results in them not having to raise taxes.
Exactly.
They can keep them flat where
Keep them flat, even though they're
Auburn can
compared
do,
to
I thought they said under the tax cap, 3.98.
Yeah.
Any district that up here, you're a short-term superintendent if you raise taxes by 4%.
Oh, you certainly are. And there are some districts you raise a tax by 1%, it turns into $50,000. Wow. That's not even one position in a school district. And we have many districts that are that small.
And do you have, you represent about, what, 140,000 people?
Just about that.
Any idea how many school districts roughly?
I think there were 23 at one point.
Okay, so are most of those high needs districts?
All of them are.
Okay.
With the exception of Skinny Islands.
Skinny Islands. So you mentioned you had some questions about the governor's college program, and I said at the beginning, you have a different perspective on this. You're most likely one of the few people in the legislature who happen to be the chairman of the board of a community college. So
I am.
So you have a little bit of a basis of knowledge here. So this is not dogma on your part. This is,
Right,
you've seen a community college work or not work.
I have seen it work, and actually the community colleges what they do is superb. The mission they fulfill is wonderful and something desperately needed and works well, particularly in a time when the economy is in a downturn, which most people have to think a bit before they understand that. But that's when we train people to go to work. And
So there's almost an inverse proportionality. As the economy suffers, community colleges thrive
right, exactly.
because there's lack of options.
Yeah, and of course enrollment drives a college. So I do I do have a certain perspective. And one would think it would be, God, free tuition, that's great. And community colleges.
Break out the champagne and everybody's
they should
happy.
be celebrating that. And in a sense, it sounds great, but is it great? What we have here is the best deal in the country right now. New York State, SUNY education, CUNY, the best bargain you can buy in the whole country as far as education is concerned. It's about $5,000 a year. That's 2 semesters to enroll yourself in a SUNY CUNY school. It's not bad. You put Pell Grants with that, and you also take the TAP, and you put that all together, and you reduce it even more. But yet, in a system that's working well right now, it picks up a lot of slack, community college in particular, in remedial skills and English, math skills.
But compared to if you look around this region, some of the 4s are $56,000, $59,000. And I look at the Rochester area where you've got St. John Fisher's, Nazareth, those schools. They're all in the 50 to 60.
The private schools are very pricey. No question about the quality of education they provide. University of Rochester, the medical school. I mean, it's wonderful. There's a place for both of them. Somehow I think this has been forgotten as well. In addition to providing free tuition, which is going to probably create a rush for students to go to the SUNY system, community colleges, they're going to leave the private system, which means that about 20%, they figure. Some of the private colleges won't survive this.
So you have Wells in your district. You used to be the mayor of Aurora.
Yep.
So a lot of this you come with background.
Wells College probably would have to close.
And have you talked to Wells about this?
I have. I've talked to the president, Jonathan Gibraltar. Tells me a 20% reduction in students right now will put them in serious jeopardy of keeping open. There are other colleges like Casanova, small schools, that will suffer from this.
And then their communities will suffer.
And very much so, mainly because these small colleges, these private colleges, so-called private, they're economic engines in themselves for their communities where they provide employment for people. Satellite businesses are out there because they're there supporting them. That will be lost, and that's a problem. Now, send all these 20% students now to the public system, or the free system, I'll say. Faculty lines in SUNY CUNY are down. I believe that right now there are probably 8,000 full-time faculty members in the entire SUNY system, and it's down about 2,000 in the last 10 years, and enrollment is up now. Because between the both systems, you can't compete with SUNY now.
Right.
Although the governor says, as far as the private colleges are concerned, let them compete. You mean give a free tuition? I guess that's what the governor expects. So the problem is no full-time faculty. You're going to have to hire faculty. The governor suggests it's going to be $165 million.
So I was going to ask you on that number alone. So originally, one of your colleagues, a member of the majority, has been advocating a similar system, I think close to, what is it, Tennessee or Kansas, one of those Midwest states. He has said this, if you really were going to do this right, that's closer to a $900 million or $1 billion.
So
is this 160 a lowball number?
Oh, it's very lowball. There's no question about it. God only knows what you're finally going to end up with, because I would say $1 billion could be easily the number, and because you're going to have such an influx of students, and you're going to have to add faculty, and you're going to also drive down the private system as well. There's another way, a better way than this. I think this is, from a political standpoint, it sounds wonderful. I think we all can remember.
You mean a national political?
Yes.
Okay, if you're running for president.
If you're running for, I mean, I say to myself, why would the governor of New York State need to have Bernie Sanders standing there with you when you're talking about free tuition? I mean,
and didn't have some of the people who've been promoting this for years.
Right.
Even in the room.
Right. So I think that's part of the plan.
So the reverse of that is, well, and obviously I hear something different because I'm up here on campus a lot, all the time. aid to colleges is not necessarily in the governor's budget to go up,
No, it's not. In fact, it's down, as a matter of fact.
because this 160 will cover it?
It's not even going to.
I don't know if that was a rhetorical question.
I think it probably was, because I just can't believe it's going to cover it.
Let me-
In the faculty, where's the faculty going to be? They had not enough faculty to cover the 20%. They could raid the private college faculty. I'm sure that would be part of the plan eventually.
I want to
Further driving down.
I wanted to go to revenues, but we'll come back to that in a second. On these two particular issues, there have been now 2 letters from the governor's staff in the media about you. So
Right.
let me ask you about this first. Part of the first one dealt with the issue that you are against certain things because the governor didn't give you a pay raise in August. If I remember correctly in this studio when we had a forum, you were not for a pay raise. Am I
No.
correct? Okay.
No, I'm not. Nor am I now.
So I ask this because it seems the governor's response is anytime somebody questions anything the governor, if you're a legislator, I should say the legislators, anybody who questions whether it's this or the millionaire's tax or anything else, it's because the governor denied a pay raise.
Right.
Is that his stand all right now for everybody?
It appears to be. He avoided the legislature with the State of the State address, as you mentioned in the introduction. That's it. And I clearly oppose a pay raise even before we had that debate on this show. I've talked about it. The amount of money we make is $79,900, and it's probably more money than most people get paid that I represent. And to reach out and ask for a pay raise, I think is inappropriate at this time.
Now, in the State of the State, you did go to the presentation. In fact, he mentioned you.
Yeah, he did.
When it was in Syracuse. Why did you go?
Well, I debated about going because I knew my colleagues, the members of the legislature, all 150 assembly
They boycotted
members,
him.
They boycotted him along with the members of the Senate. And so I debated right up to that morning whether to go, but I felt that I really wanted to hear from him exactly what he intended to do without reading it in the paper through a filter, and that's why I really went. And I did find myself
Alone?
alone in it was really kind of interesting, in the very center of the first row I got moved to, and I'm listening to the governor, and much of his presentation was fine. But when he got to things like the school aid, where he still thinks of himself as being the chief lobbyist and the one who benefits, is the best benefit for the students, he sees that is his role. And now he's moved up to the college level as well.
Do you regret going?
No, I don't. In fact, I ended up being a little critical, and I think I would have been really a hypocrite to be critical of the governor's presentation, not even hearing it.
Did you get any flack from your fellow legislators for going?
No, I really didn't get any flack. Only I got a number of emails that I read in the car. Probably 12 of them before I got back into the car after the presentation. But most of them were tongue-in-cheek. I will say one thing. Most of the members, they all boycotted it, but I don't think there was any real criticism from my colleagues.
So, 2 tax questions, or revenue side, because part of your budget is not just spending, it's revenue. So one of the issues that is in here has been this issue of the millionaire's tax, and that's an extension of a current tax. Do you support the extension?
I think I've been accused of opposing that as well.
Well, that's why I figured I'd ask you if you've been accused of a lot of things. Well, see, so that was, to me, was interesting. You're accused of all these things, and 2 missives have gone out on you, but you haven't voted on anything.
No, I expect probably another one pretty soon too.
Okay.
I have never really voted for a tax increase at all. I've tried to avoid that in all cases. I will say that I voted for the budget issues.
And sometimes they're rolled.
They're rolled together.
So the big, for those who don't know, the big ugly is that last 2 or 3 days where everything gets solved.
Right.
You may all talk about it right now, and you'll talk about it here.
Exactly.
You'll talk it in town meetings, but it all comes down to that last.
Right, and
Yeah.
and sometimes in voting for something, you may vote for something you don't want at all.
So, for example, an increase in school aid.
School aid, which is something schools desperately need.
Because I think I read in one of their messages was that because you're against the millionaires tax, you'll want to increase other taxes.
Right, right. What I would
You're not a sponsor of any bill right now to raise any taxes.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Nor I've tried not to support any. But in the past, I certainly probably have by voting for the budget, and it's buried in it. But I don't go out of my way to try to look for a tax to put on our constituents.
But for the millionaires tax for upstate, I thought I heard one number, and this may have been from the Fiscal Policy Institute, so let's say where it came from, that only 3% of those who would be impacted by the millionaires tax are upstaters. Would you agree with that? Or do you think it's a larger number?
I don't know, with the possible exception of you and what you make, I would think that probably 3% is a realistic number.
Okay.
Although there are more and more millionaires today, because I don't want to sound like it's a trifling amount, because $1 million does not buy what it used to buy
Yes.
20 years ago or so.
And a lot of that's paper millionaires.
It is, and there's a lot of
stocks.
people up here that own land and farming communities that could well look like they have $1 million, and maybe they do on paper, but to actually have spending authority of $1 million, I don't think there are that many.
The other
There are
tax.
65,000 people who make $1 million or more in New York State. I do know that.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you one other one. We get a viewer question about this 18A New York State assessment on gas and electricity bills. I think it started about 2005. It's been
Right.
renewed over and over again. It's up again this year. Do you support it? And what is it for, by the way?
Well, I think it's it goes to the general fund, the last
It's like
I know.
$500 million
Yes.
it goes. Okay.
And it is an assessment, if you want to call it that, a tax. And am I for it? No, I'm not. It was supposed to sunset several times, and it gets renewed. And I understand that it's up for to be sunsetted again. Last I heard that they were not going to sunset the law, but they were going to change it. It was going to be less, but I don't know how much less. And that's something that could be buried in the statute.
But right now you're not
Right.
for extending it.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
Last quick question. We have less than 2 minutes to go. Ride sharing has been an issue up here. Uber and these other Lyft are allowed in New York City. Should it be allowed in upstate?
I think so.
What's been the holdup?
I think there's a lot of pressure from the taxi lobby, so to speak. They don't want to have you do that.
Because it's a revenue. It's a
their
loss
revenue will
revenue.
be lost. There's a lot of, certainly New York City, where they pay a huge amount of what they call the medallion that they put on the cab. There are some concerns over safety issues, and people are providing the service, have them screened, and I think there's some opposition to that. On the other hand, it will provide some competitive situation, which will bring down some of the costs, particularly for people who have disabilities, and they can't get around as much or as easily as they possibly can. So I think that will bring them in line. I've heard stories of people pay $40 to go to the mall, or if they have to go shopping. This may help that a little bit.
Do you think it'll be a resolution will be part of the budget deal?
I think it might be. I had a meeting this morning with transit authority people who would, on the surface, you might think will oppose something like this, but they don't. They're encouraging it and supporting it. They think that it will add to what they do, provide public service, and getting maybe the Uber concept can be presented to be a central place to bring people in from where they don't have service, and then use a municipal service for them. It's an idea.
Because in a place like County Central only goes to certain areas.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Will there be an on-time budget this year?
I think there will be. There has been the last.
Is it
5 or 6
critical to
years.
have one?
No.
And is it more important to the legislature or the governor to have an on-time budget?
I think it's important from a public relations point of view to have an on-time budget. But I found in those periods of time where we didn't have an on-time, and this of course can be argued, that the budget was late, it tended to be more conservative when it was late. It tended to be more thoughtful, and it was put together in that way. It tended to
So the calendar.
force those who, the school districts, for example, municipalities, to make their wish list a little less when it was running late.
So there is an upside to sometimes the late budgets.
There is. But
All
that can be, you could have 10 people here and get 10 different versions.
And we'll have at least 3 of them in the next 2 weeks. So we do want to thank you, Assemblyman Gary D. Finch, for joining us today to give us an Albany update. Hope you'll come back on after the session's done to give us
It would be
a follow-up.
interesting. Yeah, it would be interesting as where we're at, that's for sure.
Well, thank you for your time today. In a moment, we'll be back with Beyond the Front Page with Ignite Chair John Wilcox. Ignite the Winter is next Friday, March 3rd, and we'll be talking to him about that. Next Tuesday, we'll have another Inside Government on Beyond the Front Page. We'll have a discussion of ABC Cuga's new project in the old HSBC, or better known for many people as the Marine Midland Bank in downtown Auburn, with Nancy Tian and Elizabeth Stillwell. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll have some Inside Government shows featuring John DeFrancisco, Senator who represents this district, as well as Cuyahoga County Legislative Chair Keith Batman, Owasco Town Supervisor Ed Wagner, and City Manager Jeff Dygert. On Beyond the Front Page shows, we'll include discussions about Cuyahoga Centers, the local efforts of Make-A-Wish Foundation, Seymour Library, and the Women's Rights 19K in Seneca Fall, among other topics. Before we go, though, we would like to let you know, like we did today, if you have questions, you can send them to us at cozguytho@aol.com, or you can mail them to Inside Government, 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York, 13021. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cuyahoga Community College. We want to thank you for watching. We hope you have a good night and have a great tomorrow.